Hello, my name is Simon. Welcome to Why Is That, a free speech platform where we explore big ideas and the controversies of our time. Hello, beloveds, and welcome back to another episode of Why Is That? Mass Muslim migration to the West is causing the rise of the right wing. Why is that? In this episode, I'll be doing an overview of issues raised by Muslim immigration into the West. From New Zealand, I will be playing the clip from News Hub called New Zealand Forced Marriage Victims as Young as 10, which talks about forced marriage victims that are, shall we say, imported from overseas, but also young girls who are raised in New Zealand and then shipped overseas. And often with these arrangements, money has changed hands, so it is really a form of modern-day slavery. And later on the show, I will be playing clips from Sargon of Akkad. I can't say AKA Carl Benjamin, because that's his real name. He's a YouTuber. The clips are from his segment, weekly segment, This Week in Stupid, which will be covering issues of mass Muslim immigration in the UK, which looks at a report that came out recently that shows large segments of the UK's Muslim community are so cut off from mainstream society, living in enclaves. A lot of them believe that 75% of Britain is actually Muslim. So that they make up something like 7.5%. So that represents a big break with reality when a small minority thinks they're the vast majority, just because they're so cut off from the rest of society. Also, Mr. Benjamin will be giving his thoughts on the rise of the right wing in the West. And for all those who will be being introduced to him, he identifies as a left-wing classical liberal. So he's not on the right at all. But he is opposed to progressives who are now dominating the left. He did a very good video, if you want to go on YouTube and find it. It's called Illiberal Progressives, to show the great difference between the two of them. For example, progressives are not big on free speech. They're big on censorship, where classical liberals, free speech is paramount. But to get the show rolling, I'll be playing a clip from News Hub now. But notice how they don't give specifics. They talk about forced marriages, but they don't talk about any identifying factors such as culture or religion.
News Hub has learned that underage Kiwi girls are being forced into marriage, and some as young as 10 years old are being promised as brides. 3 months ago, the government announced a move to make forced marriage illegal, but a women's group says they still constantly hear the horror stories. One victim told me her story. Bravery comes in all shapes and sizes. In this case, the form of a woman outlined by burqa. Revealing her eyes or real name on TV would threaten her safety, but she's come a long way from a life in hiding. We'll call her Lila. Her story of how she came to New Zealand voiced by an interpreter.
What I thought was, I'm going to a Western country. My life would get better. I would have a good life. But the reality was I was treated worse than an animal.
Lila was married to a man with New Zealand citizenship when he flew to her home in the Middle East. She didn't understand what the marriage ceremony meant, but it sank in when a month later she was taken to Auckland with her new husband. Her age changed from 15 to 18.
It's quite common where I come from to fake birth certificates. So my travel documents were also faked.
Lila's family was paid $6,000 for the marriage. Some, her new husband, said she then needed to pay back with a life of servitude, cooking and cleaning for his large extended family. She says marital rape began the night of the wedding.
I didn't even know, frankly, what was going on, because I was too young then. It's only by the time I had the last one that I realized, okay, this is what pregnancy is, and this is what being a mother is, and how motherhood happens.
severe beatings continued through 4 pregnancies over 10 years until it became too much, and she escaped in the middle of the night, flagging down a stranger to help her. She found refuge with the ethnic women's group Shakti.
They were lucky enough to get the chance to leave. What about the ones who are not able to leave? So this is definitely the tip of the iceberg.
Shakti says they've worked with more than 300 suspected forced marriage victims over the last 5 years. Many leave New Zealand.
I have also seen and known a few of them who were brought from Western countries back to where I come from and married off and being forced to stay at least for a couple of years there until they're able to produce some children.
And girls from New Zealand are being taken to these countries?
Yes.
At what age?
From 10 upwards.
Consent is what separates culturally accepted arranged marriages from forced marriages, which will become illegal.
Sometimes these marriages are carried out over the phone via Skype, where you have the person conducting the ceremony, speakerphone, and these are culturally validated marriage.
Now that she's free of him, Lila no longer lives with the threat of deportation from her husband, or worse, death if she returned to her own family.
It's shame for the family, and their belief is they did what they did for my well-being, and I should have stayed put. Having left that marriage is shameful for the whole family, and it's a dishonor. The only reason I'm doing this story with you is to bring in awareness of what's happening with women like myself. And through this story, I'm hoping that even if it can make a difference to the life of even one woman, I would appreciate that.
Of course, our thoughts go out to women who are suffering in such circumstances. I've said many times in the show, men love women, but I think a lot of it's Western men love women. You notice the clip starts Kiwi girls. Now, of course, these are the daughters of immigrants who obviously haven't assimilated because, I don't know, to me, Kiwi is the culture, which of course is Western, and Kiwis don't do that. I'm sorry, but it's immigrants that have come here that don't assimilate and can't be deemed Kiwi at all. In fact, it's just offensive to be associated in any way with that. But immigrant communities that don't assimilate segues right into our next clip from Carl Benjamin, aka Sargon of Akkad.
So, since we're being tremendous Islamophobes, let's have a look into Dame Casey's report into Muslim communities in Britain and how they're isolated and so cut off from the rest of society that they see the UK as 75% Islamic. Muslims in some parts of the country are so cut off from the rest of society they believe the majority of Britons share their faith, according to a shock new report. The major review by government integration czar Dame Louise Casey has found that thousands of Muslims live in enclaves with their own housing estates, schools and television channels. These are effectively colonies. I know this because I grew up on British bases. I grew up in Germany, in JHQ. I speak no fucking German because I didn't have to, because everything around me was English, everyone I knew was English, and the TV stations, the radio stations, they were all English, because we had a British colony in Germany, a small military base, in order to, well, protect against the Russians probably, and keep the Germans in line after World War II. But I think it's been closed down now, actually, but that's where I grew up. And so when I see this, I'm sitting, this is all I'm thinking. I know what it's like to grow up in such an environment, so I can tell you I know it when I see it. And I'm giving you this first-hand experience so you can understand that I know that this is a barrier to integration. There is simply no chance whatsoever of these people integrating into British society when they live like this. Some rarely, if ever, leave their neighbourhoods and believe that Britain is a Muslim country in which up to 3/4 of the population follow Islam, according to sources who have seen the report. Again, it was the same when I lived in Germany. I might visit the local town of Mönchengladbach perhaps once or twice a month. I very rarely had an actual need to go there. The new review says Muslim enclaves are concentrated in northern areas such as Bradford, Dewsbury and Blackburn, according to the reports in the Sunday Times. The newspaper quotes sources saying the report will send shockwaves through the system by attacking the government, particularly the Home Office, for failing to manage the consequences of mass migration and promote integration. It said the report will criticise the police for pandering to ethnic minorities and say some institutions are so politically correct that they are playing into the hands of the far right. This is, of course, exactly what's happening, and I'll discuss it a bit later on in the video when I talk about Comrade Corbyn. That was from the Daily Mail, and this was also reported on by The Guardian. UK Muslims show worrying belief in conspiracy theories, claims think tank. Their interpretation is Britain's Muslim communities have separatist tendencies and a deeply worrying belief in conspiracy theories. For some reason, this is always framed as a defense of these people, even though the Daily Mail's article wasn't actually an attack. They say the controversial Policy Exchange report, however, does acknowledge that 93% of British Muslims have a strong attachment to Britain. Well, if they thought it was a majority Muslim country, I suppose they would. But their attitudes to many issues such as the NHS, unemployment and immigration are broadly in line with the rest of the population. I doubt they are on immigration, mate. I really would be surprised. But with things like the NHS and unemployment, well, yeah, why wouldn't they be? Most of them live in quite poor communities. Of course they're going to be in line with benefits and free healthcare. But we're not worried about these things. These things are not the problem at all. There are a set of specific problems coming out of the Muslim communities. Did you ask them how they feel about those? Because I'd like to hear the Muslim community saying, yeah, we condemn almost all of these things that have been happening that have been deeply impactful for the communities surrounding them. And of course, the Muslim Council of Britain has strongly criticised the think tank's report, saying it seemed to pursue an agenda to cast British Muslims as separate, dangerous and in need of saving, while the think tank had provided ample fodder to countless headlines demonising Muslims. Well, look, I'm so fucking sorry that reporting on this sounds like demonising them. But to suggest that they are pursuing the agenda to make them look separate, when these communities have deliberately separated themselves and want to keep it that way because that's how they like it, you're just being an apologist. These things are what the communities themselves are doing. It's okay to talk about them. So the Policy Exchange report, Unsettled Belonging, are based upon an ICM poll which is described as the most comprehensive to date of British Muslim opinion based on interviews with 3,000 people. Its findings say that Britain's Muslims live on average somewhat more separately than other minorities, with 53% apparently showing an appetite to integrate more with non-Muslims in all aspects of life. That's a very, very lovely way of sounding that almost half of them don't even want to integrate. I mean, that is your description, an appetite to integrate more, not fully, just more, with non-Muslim society is very soft, isn't it? But saying 47% have got no interest at all in integrating, which seems to be what you're suggesting, is, well, very disturbing, is it not? And it also found that 31% believed the US government was behind 9/11 terror attacks, with a further 7% blaming the Jews, and only 4% saying Al-Qaeda was responsible. Jesus fucking Christ. That opens a can of worms, doesn't it? I'm not even going to go into it. I fucking... No. The think tank also highlighted findings that British Muslims were more likely to condemn acts of political violence and terrorism than the rest of the population, which is great, but that's probably because they have to do it quite often. I hate to be blunt about this, but that 1 in 4 British Muslims claimed that extremist views do not exist. When asked what they'd do if they became aware someone close to them was getting involved with people who support terrorism in Syria, only 52% said they would report them to the police. So 48% of them would have some knowledge of a person getting involved with terror groups in Syria, as in joining ISIS or having interactions with people in ISIS, coordinating, cooperating and whatnot, and they wouldn't say a thing. Just, I'm sorry, I don't care who you are, and I don't care what the relation that person has with you. If you think they might be getting involved in terrorism, or supporting or facilitating it in any way, you have a moral duty to report that person. A foreword to the pamphlet by the Labour MP for Birmingham, Perry Barr, Khalid Mahood, said it was startling that so many British Muslims seemed to be ready to entertain wild and outlandish conspiracy theories about dark forces at work to do down Muslims. And again, this is exactly the kind of mindset the SJWs have. As if there is a grand patriarchy out to persecute women or black people or whatever, when they're just living in a free society. And they can do what the fuck they like, basically. He said that the poll found that organisations such as the Muslim Council of Britain had very little support amongst British Muslims and were failing to reflect their views on issues such as Prevent. He suggested the government needed to realise their views only represented the sectional demands of those on the fringes of British Muslim life. And I think that's a very important thing. I'm very annoyed by these special interest groups because I think often they do, again, just like feminists petitioning the government in what is in women's interest, they don't represent women. They're a tiny fringe group of 7% of the population. And yet they become, 7% is enough to make the government think, well, Christ, this must be representative, when it's not. And the thing is, these failings are all important to note, because these are all contributing factors to what the left is finally realising is the global rise of the right.
The West has developed quite a PC culture where if you question the benefits of immigration, you're racist. And frankly, I'm so sick of people trying to shut down conversations on the topic. And all of this has come from the left, who have championed immigration, I would say cynically, to break down the host culture, to help reform it, shall we say, because as the next clip I'll play shows, it is a form of class warfare against the poor to bring in mass migrations of people they have to compete with. And there was that sort of excuse, oh, well, we brought them in to do the jobs nobody else wanted to do. And it's like, well, A, when you're poor, there are no jobs. You know, you want a job, you want money, but also, okay, we'll bring in these foreign people to do the jobs we don't want to do as a sort of underclass. Isn't that, like, massively racist? But, oh well. But as the right wing, where one of the things of the right wing is nationalism, not necessarily ethnic nationalism, but I mean, I'm of the opinion immigration should benefit the people of the country, where when we hear talk about, oh, it benefits the economy, well, does that benefit the people? Which there's some information in this clip that shows maybe not so much. But if there's issues which of the average working man and the writers talking about it, well, they're going to go to the people who are talking about the issues, as Sargon's about to cover now.
And the thing is, these failings are all important to note, because these are all contributing factors to what the left is finally realising is the global rise of the right. I'm not going to go through this independent article because it's really, really long and really obnoxious. You'd think they could be a little more humble in defeat, since they were the ones who miscarried so badly. But anyway. So this week, Jeremy Corbyn has been making the rounds trying to deal with the establishment losing to the right wing, as he met with Europe's centre-left leaders to see what could be done. Europe's centre-left parties must reject the establishment or watch the populist far-right win across the continent, Jeremy Corbyn has finally fucking warned. Yes, well done, Jeremy. We've realised that. I mean, it only took Brexit and Trump for you to realise that these populist uprisings are fucking serious, and you should be taking them seriously. But let's talk about your definition of the establishment. In a speech to Labour's European sister parties at the Party of European Socialists conference in Prague, well, that just fucking says it all, doesn't it? You are not liberals, are you? I mean, don't get me wrong, I mean, there's a good question of whether you ever have been, but you've always kind of claimed to be the sort of liberal left-wing party, and it really is now looking like you're not in any way, shape or form. Just so people are aware. I mean, I want this fucking stamped on your manifesto. We are not a liberal party. But I think the public are beginning to see that anyway. Corbyn warned that the populist right had correctly identified the problems with the prevailing economic model. That is one problem we're having, is the economic model. But it's not the only one, Jeremy. You have to understand there are social ills as well as economic ills. But gangs of Muslims roaming the streets, bullying natives because they don't follow Islamic laws, isn't an economic problem. And I do wonder if that's the reason that he ignores the social issues coming from these communities. He argued the solutions of those anti-immigrant, anti-EU and anti-Islam parties were only toxic dead ends that would not solve people's problems. Now, this is very interesting, isn't it? I've never for the life of me been able to understand why the left is in any way pro-immigration. It just creates extra competition and pressure, social pressure for the working class. No good comes of it for the people who are, quote, the most vulnerable in society, as Jeremy Corbyn so often likes to say. And yet, for some reason, he is pro-immigration. I can only assume that this comes from the attitude they must hold that immigrants are not held to the same moral standards as the rest of us. This is the problem, though. It's conflating Muslims with Islamists. Islamism is a specific political ideology. Muslims are people who follow a religion. And as we've already seen, most of the community doesn't respect the Islamists themselves, or any other kind of self-appointed moral busybody that claims to represent them. Basically, this is why it's bad to politicize identities. Now I have to talk about the Muslim community, even though I know it's only a very small segment of that community, because the left wants to do this by identity instead of ideology, as in what they are rather than what they think. We can't, and the left can't, take any action against them. And so Corbyn is forced to pretend the problem isn't also social, as well as economic. Corbyn's comments come a day before Austria votes in a rerun of its presidential election in which a far-right Norbert Hofer could be on the verge of victory. Other countries across Europe have also seen extreme right-wingers poised to take power, with the Freedom Party leading the polls in Austria and the Front National set to make the final round of the French presidential election. Yes, just in case you're on the left, you should be looking at this in horror. And I want you to understand, if you're a progressive leftist who engages in identity politics, you made this happen. Your individual contributions to the people you annoyed with your stupid identity politics, obscuring the real issues in what's going on in these communities and others and whatnot. You made this happen. Your contribution was to this end result. In some minuscule way, influencing a few, maybe a dozen people in your life or something. The thousands of you that are doing it have all contributed to this atmosphere where people are sick of not being able to talk about something that's really going on without you screaming bigot. It doesn't even matter if they are bigots. Do you understand? Even if they are bigots, these things are really happening. These events are real. So it doesn't matter. We're talking about real life, not your ideology. Because you scream bigot and then refusing to go any further with anything is you saying, well, I just don't want to think about it. But that doesn't change real life. Corbyn says, politics has been shaken across the world. As socialists and progressives, we know very well why the populist right is gaining ground. No, you don't. That's the problem. You don't know shit. He says, we know the gap between rich and poor is widening. Yes, it is. And as the Bank of England has said, mass immigration has been partially responsible for that, by flooding the marketplace with low-wage earners. It makes it, there's more competition for the existing ones, and it's a beneficial state of affairs for the corporate global power you will go on to complain about. We know the living standards are stagnating or falling and insecurity is growing. We know that people rightly feel left behind by forces unleashed by globalization, powerless in the face of a deregulated corporate power. Yeah, exactly. They do. And this mass immigration is entirely in the favor of deregulated corporate power. This should be a regulation against corporate power. Even if you don't care about the social issues that come with it, you can look at the economic issues and say, well, this only benefits one class of people in society, and it's not the class of people who have to bear the burden of it. It should be just entirely left-wing to be anti-immigration on the basis it is basically a form of class warfare. He then says, in many cases, the populist right do identify the right problems, but their solutions are toxic dead ends of the past. And this is where he slips right into ideological mode. How exactly can just limiting immigration to Western countries be toxic? How could that be toxic? At worst, it could be considered neutral. Okay, well, you're not doing any good for some, you're doing some good for others, and this good that is being done to the poorest people in society, which is the very mandate of the government. As in, this is how you get the working class to vote for you. You do things in their interests. And ending mass immigration is certainly one of them. And then Corbyn says of the right wing something utterly, utterly partisan. He says they are political parasites feeding off people's concerns and worsening conditions, blaming the most vulnerable for society's ills, instead of offering a way for taking back real control of our lives from the elites who serve their own interests. Jeremy, that's every politician. They all do this, or at least you would think they should do this, because the purpose of politicians was to serve the interest of the public. So they should be responsive to people's concerns. They should literally be saying, okay, what are your concerns? That's what you want done. Well, then it's my job to fucking do it. And if you vote for me, I'll go do that because that's what you want done. And since they're winning everywhere, that means that's what most people want, you cunt. That's fucking democracy, you twat. That's the point. They want their interests served, which also serves the interest of the people serving the public interest. For the love of God, Jeremy, really pisses me off. You're such a moralising, self-righteous cunt. The fact that you would attribute this only to right-wingers because you're so pure really pisses me off.
To finish off, there are consequences for ignoring the reality of a situation. We've talked about on the show before the mass Cologne sexual assault attacks, the Rotherham rape scandal and other rape scandals, all committed by the migrants coming in who are almost exclusively Muslim, who do not share Western beliefs about how women should be treated, and the EU has completely ignored it. In mid-October in Germany, in the university town of Freiburg, there was the rape and murder of Maria Leidenberger by an Afghan migrant. Now, the only reason we hear about this is because her father was a top EU official. Of the date of this broadcast would have been her 20th birthday. She was a med student training to be a doctor to help people, and in her spare time she volunteered at the migrant centres. Yet any criticism in Germany about the migrants is automatically deemed racism, and you can even get a visit from the police for it, and the left doesn't want to talk about it, to the point where one German left-wing MP, Celine Gorin, was raped by two migrants, but told the police they were ethnic Germans, and when she only reported to the police that they were actually migrants after hearing a story of another rape that happened in the area. You have countries like Norway and Sweden whose records show an exponential increase in rape linked to the migrants until they stopped keeping such information, which isn't fooling anyone. And people see this, and people know, and the right talks about these things, and people will support them. I view myself as a centralist. Indeed, I used to be on the left, but the more globalist and progressive the left wing becomes, well, let's just say this isn't the country I grew up in. The left seem to have no regard for Kiwi culture and seems to despise Western civilization in general, all of which they will deny. But who are going to believe, us or your own lying eyes? Facts don't care about your feelings, nor do facts care about your ideology. And those in the habit of denying reality are frankly, literally crazy people. And people will be attracted to those who speak the truth.